Welcome to this week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. I'm John Strum, and I'm the host of the Real Talk MS podcast. Each week, Real Talk MS reaches thousands of people in more than 100 countries around the world with the news that people affected by MS need to know. My wife, Jean, lived with progressive MS for 23 years, so I've had a front row seat experiencing all the ways that MS can impact a family. I'm a past member of the International Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Steering Committee, and currently I'm a district activist leader and trustee for the National MS Society, and I chair the Society's California Government Relations Advisory Committee. The MS Society's Ask an MS Expert webcast is designed to give us a place for the MS community to connect and to connect you with experts who are ready to answer your questions on the topics that impact people affected by MS every day. Please feel free to post your comments and questions on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch. MS navigators are online throughout today's program, answering those questions, connecting you to resources. Animals can add so much to our lives in terms of comfort, joy, and companionship. But to people with MS who may be dealing with physical, cognitive, or other challenges, they can be so much more, providing safety and security in addition to all the other good things that our pets bring us. Today, we're joined by Trevor Hardy, an employment law attorney with the law firm of Littler Mendelson in Cleveland, Ohio. Trevor is a member of the National MS Society's Activism Advisory Committee, the committee that advises the Society on how to use public policy to improve the lives of people affected by MS. And he's a district activist leader in Ohio's 11th Congressional District. Trevor lives with MS and has recently been teamed up with his service dog, Tristan. Today, we'll look at the impact that Tristan has had on Trevor's life and answer some common questions you may have about how service animals can support people living with MS. Welcome, Trevor. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Before we get to your experience with Tristan, can you tell us about how and when you were diagnosed with MS and what the circumstances were that led to that diagnosis?
Absolutely. So I received my diagnosis in 2018. I actually live with progressive MS. So I went through a diagnostic process that included MRIs, a spinal tap, and other tests to see whether there were other conditions that might be causing the symptoms that I experienced. So I dealt with balance issues. I was falling pretty frequently, had difficulty walking, suffered from optic neuritis as well, and dealt with other conditions and issues and symptoms that other people with MS also experience.
So tell us about Tristan. What kind of a dog is he, and how has Tristan helped you to avoid some of those falls you mentioned?
Well, I love talking about Tristan. So Tristan is a service dog that I received through a wonderful organization called Canine Companions. They're based in California, and they serve all 50 states and provide service dogs free of cost to individuals with disabilities, individuals who suffer from PTSD, and other individuals who may have hearing loss or may be hard of hearing. Tristan is a cross between a golden retriever and a Labrador retriever. He's a yellow male, and I graduated with him just about 6 months ago in February.
So aside from giving you some assistance in balance and mobility, what other ways does Tristan assist you in your everyday life?
So one of the biggest things for me, one of the biggest effects that I have from my MS is falling. And before I had Tristan, I fell 2 to 3 times per week. It wasn't uncommon for me to fall and hit my head or fall into a wall. And a lot of that was caused by dropping things and then leaning over to pick those things up. So one of the real benefits that I've noticed having Tristan is that whenever I drop something, he's trained to pick that item up, he's retrieving it, and then he sits in a controlled position and hands that item to me so I'm not bending over to pick it up. So it helps with those balance issues and prevents me from falling.
Can you tell us about some of the other specific tasks that a service dog like Tristan might be trained to do to help people specifically who are affected by MS?
So I'm really lucky with Tristan. The organization I got him from trains in about 40 different commands. So whenever Tristan came out with of graduation with me, he was able to assist with things that help me, but could help other people with MS. And that includes pulling a laundry basket or picking up items that are dropped on the floor. If you have dexterity issues, the dogs are able to open and close doors, drawers, and cabinets. They can even perform transactions for you. So Tristan is trained to open his mouth and take a credit card for me, place his front paws onto a counter, hand that credit card over to a sales associate, and then take the bag of items that I purchased and hand it back to me. So for those days when you have difficulty with fatigue, difficulty with lifting your arms, that's another way that Tristan and other dogs like him are trained to assist.
While the physical benefits that you've just mentioned are the most obvious and immediate ways for a service animal to assist someone with any sort of disability, what's been your experience with Tristan when it comes to maybe social or emotional benefits that you've derived?
There are definitely social benefits. So I use a cane to ambulate. I've used a cane for several years now, and sometimes I think that can make me look a little unapproachable. But having Tristan there, Tristan is an instant bridge between me and the community. When young children or even when adults see him, they want to come and talk about the dog. They want to come and talk about my experience with him, and it makes my MS less apparent and my disability less apparent, and makes me just a normal person to people who come up to talk. And as far as the emotional benefit, I would say just having that companion is really important. So Tristan goes everywhere with me. He goes to work with me. He goes to Target with me. He goes to grocery stores. He goes to dinner, restaurants. And having him there is a constant source of support, knowing that I have someone or something that's able to assist me when things get difficult. I don't have to rely on other people as much. And Tristan's really given me a lot of my independence back.
Well, I want to circle back to some of the venues you just mentioned where Tristan is helpful and is with you. Before we get to that, though, listening to all the ways that a service dog like Tristan can improve your quality of life, I'm sure some of our viewers are wondering how to go about getting one. So how or where does someone go to begin this process? And thinking about it, I'm wondering, can someone elect to train their own dog to be a service dog?
So to go to that last question first, yes, some individuals do train their own dog to become a service dog. I had a very different experience because I chose to go through an organization. I recommend from my personal experience going through an organization because I had such a phenomenal experience during that process. It took about 2 years for me to go from application to graduation. It can sometimes take longer. It can sometimes be shorter, depending on the organization. But the process that I followed was providing an application, providing medical records and documentation to show that I had a disability and would benefit from having Tristan in my life. And I also had an in-person interview where I talked about my needs, different limitations, and how a service dog would help me with some of those limitations. At that point, I also provided pictures of my home, pictures of my yard, pictures of my community, so that I could show where the dog would be, what opportunities the dog would have for exercise. And there's a really thorough process that took place to make sure that Tristan and I would be the best match for one another. So I think having the benefits of a service dog organization like Canine Companions can really streamline and make the process a little easier. And I know based on my experience, that's the way I would go if I had to do it again.
The Americans with Disabilities Act, otherwise known as the ADA, just celebrated its anniversary. It was signed into law 32 years ago to protect the fundamental rights of people with disabilities. Now, as you mentioned a moment ago, people with a service animal may need them in a variety of places and spaces that we find ourselves in every day, like restaurants, stores, schools, hotels, and maybe even their place of employment. What's been your experience as you're out and about with Tristan? Are businesses accepting when you and Tristan walk in?
For the most part, I'd say they are. So I've had one negative interaction at a restaurant nearby, and then at other times, most people are very receptive. They want to thank me for coming in. They want to talk about Tristan, and they're really welcoming. I'm surprised by the number of places I go, including restaurants, where before they ask me what I'd like to drink, they ask if Tristan needs a drink of water, and we'll bring a bowl out for him. So I think most places are very accepting and understanding, and I think part of the disconnect that can happen is a lack of education. And one of the ways I see that I can benefit in other individuals with not just MS, but with disabilities more broadly, is to educate businesses and other places of public accommodation about the importance of allowing service dogs into those places.
So, what are the rules, or more specifically, the laws under the ADA? What questions are businesses permitted or not permitted to ask you? And what's the best way to navigate those kinds of questions?
Yeah, so fortunately, there are a lot of good government resources out there to educate people about service dogs and what the rights are of individuals who have service dogs. So it's important to keep in mind that I have a service dog and I'm allowed to have access rights with him. But if I were to give Tristan to another individual, those rights don't travel to that other individual. Tristan is really attached to me and is my service dog. So it's important that I keep control over him whenever we go out in public. Places of public accommodation are required to accept service dogs. Some places that are excluded from that list, which might be a little surprising, include churches or private establishments. So if you attend a house of worship, I would recommend talking to the leadership of that house of worship and saying, I have a service dog. Is this something that can be accommodated and brought in? I think most places are going to be accepting of that if it allows a parishioner or an individual who attends services to come. I think another thing I've thought of recently is weddings. So a lot of weddings are hosted at private halls, and some of those locations are not required to accept service dogs. Same with popular places like Airbnb and VRBO. So some of those privately owned homes, you want to check and see if the policies of the company that operates or that facilitates those rentals requires acceptance of service dogs. And if you are in a situation where you run into an individual who may not be as educated about service dogs, they can ask you two questions. ADA guidance that's out there that's readily available online mentions two questions. And those questions are, is the dog a service animal required for a disability? And what work or task has the dog been trained to perform? So they can't go and ask you, do you have MS? Do you have muscular dystrophy? Or do you have some other condition that might cause a disability or a disability? Yeah. So in this case, that's something that I will normally share with individuals. If they are wondering whether Tristan should be allowed in, I remind them he's a service dog. He's trained to perform a task for me, and that we should be granted admission.
We heard from Jake, who tells us he's considering getting a service dog, but he rents an apartment that doesn't allow dogs. Do apartments and other residential properties have to comply with the ADA?
So you'll want to check with some of your local laws, but you can also check with the Fair Housing Act. So the Fair Housing Act controls some of the laws around what is and isn't acceptable in renting or accommodations in housing. So generally, service dogs should be permitted in rental housing. It's an accommodation that can be granted, but just be sure that your service dog, acts appropriately inside the house, doesn't cause any damage, and is trained well enough that service dog will respect the house that they're in.
We've been talking about service dogs, but there are a few other pets that take on different roles for people. Maybe you can help us understand the differences between emotional support animals, therapy animals, comfort or companion animals. In terms of where they're allowed in public places, are they also considered service animals and covered under the ADA?
So they're generally not. So I think the big distinction is Tristan is not a pet. Tristan is a specially trained dog who provides a service. He's a working dog. You might see therapy dogs in hospitals, and therapy dogs may go through certification programs or different kinds of training, but they're not necessarily trained to perform a service or perform work for an individual who's disabled. A lot of times they're there to provide comfort, to provide support, and there's a distinction there between working for an individual with a disability by providing a service that mitigates that disability and providing emotional support. So those individuals, whether they're companion animals or therapy animals, are not necessarily granted admission into places of public accommodation. They don't have the same protections that a service dog like Tristan would.
You and I have been talking about how service dogs can help people affected by MS, but service dogs themselves need care as well. What are some of the things that you had to take into consideration before getting Tristan, and what advice might you have for others before they decide to add a service dog to their life?
I think that's a really important question, and one that I thought a lot about before I ended up getting Tristan. And for me, I needed to think about the financial impact of having a service dog. So you need to think, are you able to provide veterinary care, food, toys, other activities for the dog? It's also important to figure out whether you're going to be able to provide the dog with sufficient exercise. So I normally take Tristan on walks for between 45 minutes and an hour each day. That can be split up over the day, but he needs sufficient exercise. And I think it's important, especially for people who struggle with mobility, you may not have to be the individual to provide that activity and that exercise. A family member or a friend who is in the house with you can also provide that and help out. But you have to be willing to give the time, the love, and the attention that goes to having a service dog. Because I'll tell you, I train Tristan all the time. So I use the cues and commands that he knows and make sure that they stay fresh for him so that he can continue to help me as things progress. And that's one of the benefits of having him, is that even though he helps me with a certain level and certain number of tasks right now, he's trained to help me as my MS progresses, so that when new things, different things come up, he'll be able to use some of those commands so that he knows, so that he can help. So keeping an active training regimen is important as well.
Well, given that you and Tristan have been together a relatively short period of time, this probably isn't something that you're thinking about, but like anyone else with a full-time job, there does come a time when a service dog needs to retire. I'm sure that's not an easy decision, particularly after years of close partnership. Can you tell us what you do know about this process, and maybe share some key points that people should consider in determining whether it's time for their service dog to retire?
That's another really good point, because, service dogs, just like a working person, has a working life. And there's a limited amount of time that a service dog should be put out into the field to do work. And I'm really fortunate through Canine Companions to have an opportunity to collaborate with them about Tristan's progress, what Tristan's able to do, what he's not able to do. And they'll work with me to help make that decision about retirement. Fortunately for Canine Companions, I can keep Tristan as a retired dog. And what they do is they have a successor program. So I would go in for a new round of training and get matched with a new service dog who would come home and help me with mitigating my disability and my limitations. And then Tristan would retire and get to have more of a pet style life and wouldn't have the same access rights that the new service dog would have with me. So it's certainly something that, even though I've only been matched with Tristan for 6 months, having the benefit of the organization behind me and knowing what opportunities are coming in the future really puts me at ease and gives me some peace of mind and allows me to really enjoy my time with Tristan.
Well, thank you for sharing some really great information about the role of service dogs for people living with MS. This is a subject that I'm sure many of our viewers may not even have considered until today. Let me ask you this. What would you say is the greatest benefit you've experienced since Tristan came into your life?
I think it's multifold, and I hate to not be able to give you one. I think for me, the biggest MS related benefit is that since February 11th, when I brought Tristan home, I have not fallen once. Before February 11th, like I said, I was falling 2 to 3 times a week. It was not uncommon for me to fall in the office, to fall at home. I even fell and sustained a minor head injury and was in a wheelchair for a brief period of time. But since I've had Tristan, I really have seen a benefit to having him pick up things that I drop and handle certain tasks that would otherwise lead me to the greater possibility of falling. So that is the primary MS related benefit. But what it's also done is it's created a community for me, not just through the chapter of the organization of Canine Companions that is in the northern part of Ohio, but also a greater connection to other individuals with disabilities. And Tristan has given me an outlet and a way to connect and advocate for people with disabilities who use service dogs, who are in need of service dogs. And I really see that as another benefit of having him.
Well, as I just mentioned, you've shared some great information that I don't know everyone has really thought about before now. So let me ask you, what would you say are the top 3 takeaways that you'd like our viewers to remember?
Yeah, I think the first one is to determine whether a service dog may be appropriate for you. That may seem pretty obvious, but evaluating whether a service dog fits into your life is incredibly important. I think the second piece is, in my opinion, identifying an organization that would best serve you in your search for a service dog. In my case, that was Canine Companions. That's the one I would recommend just based off of their reputation and their presence throughout the country. And the third thing I think that's really important is to evaluate the financial impact that a service dog may have on you and determine whether you're in a position where you can provide for the service dog, provide for yourself, and maintain all of the things that you need so that you and the service dog have a great relationship and team relationship going forward.
Well, thanks again for sharing your experiences with Tristan with us, Trevor. We have one more question from a viewer. We heard from Nancy. She told us that she has a service dog and people often approach her and want to pet or play with her dog. She's wondering whether you have any suggestions for how she can educate those people who want to interact with her service dog in this way.
I do. So I run into that several times. Actually, on my first outing with Tristan, I went into Target and someone came up and just started petting him without asking. And I've had that happen recently in my office building in an elevator. Someone reached down and started petting him. And what I like to do is use that as an educational opportunity. Even though Tristan wears a vest and he wears a collar, and I even have an attachment to his leash that says service dog, please do not pet. Some individuals just don't see that. They're so enamored by the dog. And what I do is I explain that Tristan isn't a pet, that he's a working dog, and that for my security, it's really important that Tristan stay focused, that he stay focused on the task that I may be having him do, and that if other individuals come up and distract him, that can create a safety issue for me. There are times where service dogs are not on the clock. So if I'm at home, Tristan knows that he can go and chew his bone, that he can play with his toys. And then whenever I issue another command, he knows that he's back on and needs to perform his task. And I think one of the things that's really important is when you're educating people, remind them that service dogs love what they do. They are specially trained for this. They go through a rigorous process that not all dogs who are raised to become service dogs actually end up making it through. And I will tell you that every time I give Tristan a command, his tail goes crazy. He's always wagging. He's really excited to do it. And he appreciates the love and support that he gets whenever he completes the task. So I think maintaining that educational approach and working with the community and educating them, not just on, the safety impact, but also on how much service dogs enjoy what they're doing, that can really create a conversation that not only educates that person, but arms that person with the education and knowledge to go and educate other people.
Well, I want to thank everyone who submitted questions and thank you for being with us today, Trevor.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Before we close, I want to remind you that the National MS Society's MS Navigator team is your best partner when it comes to connecting you to the very best information and resources on living with MS. You can reach an MS Navigator by phone, email, or through the Society's website by chat. For information and resources on MS, please visit the Society's website. You'll find research updates and news, information on connection programs like self-help groups and MS Friends. You'll find ways for you to get involved, and you'll hear about upcoming events that are taking place near you. Remember, you can connect with the National MS Society and others affected by MS on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And I hope you'll join me every week on the Real Talk MS podcast, where I continue the conversation and start here. You'll find Real Talk MS at realtalkms.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. I'd like to thank Trevor Hardy for joining us today. Please remember that a recording of this webcast will be available at the Society's website at nationalmssociety.org/MSexpert, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. I hope you'll join us at this same time for next week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. You can always find our upcoming program topics on the National MS Society's website. And now I have a favor to ask each of you. Getting your feedback on today's webcast is important. So if you're watching on Facebook Live, you'll see a link to a survey pinned to the comments section. And on YouTube, you'll find that link in the program description. Completing the survey makes a real difference. The information you provide helps us continuously improve, and it helps shape future programs. The survey takes just 1 minute, so I hope you'll take a minute to fill it out. On behalf of Trevor Hardy and the National MS Society, I want to thank you once again for joining us. Please stay safe and make healthy choices.